Welcome to all of you to another sold-out Dean Speaker Series. As you know, this is our highest level speaker series, and we're very, very excited to have Steve Ellis with us today. My name's Rich Lyons, and I'm the Dean of the Haas School of Business. Just a quick mention for some of the upcoming events in the Dean Speaker Series. Bill Block, some of you will know Bill Block, executive producer and founder of QED International. You'll recognize QED as International as the film production company behind Blair Witch Project, recent film District 9, which of course was just put up for Best Picture. This next talk from Bill Block will be in the Wells Fargo room here. March 4th is the next one coming up. That one's also at 12:30. We are all pleased to welcome back to campus, he's a Cal grad, Steve Ellis. He's worldwide managing director of Bain Company, and a partnership organization. That is the equivalent, as you know, of CEO. As many of you already know, he was part of the Cal undergraduate program. It's an honor not only to have him here in general, but to bring back Cal alums and people that are so connected to our school is a great part of this series and a great part of what we're able to do here at Berkeley. A number of other Bain guests that I want to mention here, a lot of them from the consulting side, also the recruiting group. There's so many of them I can't go through them by name, but I want to welcome them and thank them for being here. Some of them I know from the classroom in years back. Bain was founded in 1973. It is, of course, one of the world's leading consulting firms, global business consulting firms. All of you know it. A little bit of background, if I may, on Steve Ellis, and then we'll get directly to his talk. Prior to joining Bain, he worked in a Silicon Valley consulting firm that he co-founded. That was 1989. He joined Bain in 1993, served as office head in the San Francisco and Palo Alto offices before being elected in 2005 as the worldwide managing director. He continues in this position today, serving also as general partner of the firm's venture capital fund. Throughout his career, he's worked in a wide range of industries, a wide range of engagements, many, many different firms, many different areas, strategy, marketing, merger integration, change management. He's really intellectually been connected to a lot of what that firm does and a lot of what we do. Mr. Ellis currently serves on the board of the Bridgespan Group, an independent nonprofit consulting firm offering services customized to the distinctive needs and challenges of organizations in the nonprofit sector. At Berkeley, as an undergrad, economics and history with honors. I didn't mention yet that he's also got an MBA from the school across the bay, Stanford Graduate School of Business. It is with great pleasure that I bring up Mr. Steve Ellis. Steve, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction and for getting that whole Stanford bit out of the way early. Appreciate that. It's a real privilege for me to be here today, and I'm hoping that we can make this as dynamic and as interactive session as possible. So I'm going to try and keep my formal remarks down to about 30 minutes, so we've got lots of time for Q&A. Whenever you talk about the leadership, the topic of leadership, it's oftentimes very challenging to avoid, sort of big conceptual theories. And so one of the things that I'm going to try to do today is just use my own personal experiences, lessons I've learned from my journey, and hopefully in sharing a few of these stories, make this relevant to you, particularly given where you are in your careers, which I think is actually a pretty exciting time, and I think is pretty important as it relates to your potential as a leader going forward. So before I get going, I want to just provide a little bit of context on my role at Bain Company, because that'll help you understand how I look at the issue of leadership, because it is a little bit unique. Now, I'm Bain's worldwide managing director, right? And it's the role is actually very similar to the way any CEO role works at a big corporation. I lead teams that are responsible for setting and implementing our global strategy, for addressing major investment decisions, for managing the operations of our 42 offices around the world, determining what new innovative products and capabilities we have, attracting, retaining great talent for purposes of leadership supply, managing the finances of the business, P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, supporting our brand, all the things that are critical to the role of a CEO. However, there are some elements of my job that are different than the way a typical corporation works. Bain Company is a partnership. It's a private partnership. It's owned by the partners. And as a consequence, I report to them. They are not only the owners of the business, but they happen to be the line executives, the sales force, and the people responsible for executing our strategy. So in effect, I'm really not their boss. Right? I was elected by our 450 partners to serve them and the other 4,500 members of our team. We don't have a command and control infrastructure where I just go tell people what to do. In fact, our partners don't have to do anything that I tell them to do. Can you imagine that? So as a consequence, I have to manage our business. I have to lead our business with what I like to call sort of the 5 I's of effective leadership. The first is inclusion. I've got to involve the people who are affected by my decisions in the decision-making process. Second is inquiry. I've got to listen and ask a lot of questions in that order. Insight, I have to use the answers to those questions to articulate a clear sense of direction. Influence, I have to communicate a compelling rationale for a specific direction we're going to take. And then finally, incentives. I've got to make sure that we're continuously rewarding the right behaviors and the right outcomes. So, inclusion, inquiry, insight, influence, and incentives. Now, it sounds like a pretty straightforward set of principles, but believe me, it's very difficult to maintain the discipline on all 5 of those fronts and not to revert to command and control. I'm just going to tell you what to do, particularly when, as a leader, you find external and or internal forces really intensifying. And you can imagine that the last 18 months have really challenged every great leader, both in the public and private sector. Now, a lot of people would say, well, gee, Steve, this is interesting. This leadership model you talk about is sort of unique. Well, actually, at Bain Company, we call this leadership archetype, being a servant leader. And it's actually the cornerstone of the way that we think about leadership at Bain Company. It guides the way that I serve the partnership, and it frankly guides everybody who plays a leadership role in our firm. And it's very easy, I think, to dismiss this and say, hey, you know what? Well, Bain Company is a private partnership. It's a consulting firm. It's a professional service firm. And this type of leadership only really works in those environments. Well, actually, nothing could be further from the truth. There are plenty of consulting firms, professional service firms out there, even private partnerships, that function with a command and control leadership model. And their leaders fit that mold. Conversely, and very importantly, there are a lot of very successful private and public companies, small and large, that operate with more of a servant leader model. And they have leaders at the helm who reflect that. Now, Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great. And what Good to Great was all about was finding those companies that had this leadership model and the leaders who were responsible for creating those environments and those enterprises. And he demonstrated empirically that they outperform over time their peers. Level 5 leadership. That's what I continue to aspire, a threshold I continue to aspire to attain someday. So with that context, let me spend a minute talking about 3 leadership principles that I think are really important. You know, when anybody asks you about what makes for a great leader, you know, what are your secrets to good management, you know, there are 15 things that come to mind as I think about my career to date, anyway. And a lot of them have been written about. They've been discussed. You guys have probably studied them at length, discussed them in your classrooms, experienced them in your own work environments. But I do think that there are three in particular that the experts tend not to spend quite as much time on, but I believe are the three that really separate the truly great leaders from the many good ones. The first of those is authenticity. In other words, who am I? Now, how many times over the last 12 months have you been asked, or have you asked yourself, what am I going to do with my career? Who do I want to be? What do I want to accomplish? Well, those are really good questions, but I would argue that they are the wrong place to start. That actually it's critically important to understand who you are, to make sure that you're clear about your strengths, clear about the values and beliefs and passions that you have. Because without that, you're going to make it very difficult to fulfill your underlying leadership potential. And let me see if I can give you a personal example to bring this to light. When I entered Stanford Business School in 1988, I came from a small boutique consulting firm in Silicon Valley. And at that point in my career, I had a pretty good idea of my strengths and weaknesses, of the specific skills and experiences I needed to augment my resume, a little bit about what I loved and didn't like so much about the business world. I had a pretty good sense for where I wanted to take my career. Now, this wasn't because I was particularly introspective or thoughtful young man. It was because I had to answer all these darn questions in my business school applications, right? But I was forced to be a little bit introspective. Now, after spending a summer on Wall Street, exciting time, enjoyed it a lot, I came back to Stanford, and I had the opportunity to take two signature courses at the Stanford Business School. One was on entrepreneurship and venture capital, taught by Pitch Johnson, really one of the fathers of venture capital. And the other was in small business management, taught by a then relatively unknown Jim Collins. Now, those two courses were worth both years of tuition, believe me. That, in combination with the intense sort of peer pressure that exists at Stanford, as it does at many business schools, but particularly acute at Stanford, to avoid going corporate and to do what any really worthwhile business school student should do, which is to go out and start a new company, be an entrepreneur. Now, that's what I chose to do. I took the opportunity as a result of that to launch a startup company with my former boss at the boutique consulting firm I worked for. Now, I don't regret that decision, but in retrospect, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. All right? At that moment, I was not being true to who I was. I did not ask myself the question, what really are my strengths? What are my passions? What are my interests? And as a consequence, I launched into this entrepreneurial experience but found myself, while I was learning and actually having a good time as I was addressing the challenges of being an entrepreneur, that I really wasn't in my zone. I wasn't really playing to my strengths. I wasn't finding that fuel, that energy, that passion from the day-to-day work. And one of the things that I had missed was that really what I wanted is I wanted to be part of a larger organization, right, where I had the opportunity to learn from the best, right, to work alongside great leaders, and frankly, to earn the right to lead really high-performance teams. That's where my energy and my passion was. That's really what got me excited about getting up and going to work every day. Now, that experience, that 3 years as only a modestly successful entrepreneur, was wonderful. And I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. But in the end, I really wasn't in my zone. And the way I like to describe it is it was a little bit like I was running in sand. You know that feeling? Right? Where you're making progress, but with twice the effort and going half the speed. And so when I had the opportunity to join Bain Company in 1993, it was very evident to me very quickly that this was an organization that had a culture, a mission, its people, that much better aligned with my values and my beliefs and my passions and interests. In fact, it was a little bit, once I joined the firm, like I was stepping out of the sand and onto a highly responsive surface, like the track at Edwards Stadium. Suddenly, the strides were more effortless. My pace accelerated. And I was training with people who had competed at the highest levels. So, as a consequence, really understanding who you are, really understanding and getting a grip on what your strengths are, what really gets you excited, is essential ingredient, an essential ingredient. I would say a necessary ingredient for you to be an effective leader. Otherwise, you're not going to have the energy and the stamina to excel in an environment where leadership is such a demanding part of the job. Now, I'll give you another example here. This story about my joining Bain is really not meant to be an advertisement for Bain. I think that there were probably many organizations where I could have found an equal level of alignment, maybe even more. But the important thing is that you guys are at a really pivotal part in your stage of your career, right, where you have an opportunity to step back and ask these questions. Right, you have your colleagues, you have the faculty, you have people who come on campus who can describe to you what they do and why they're passionate about it. And it's really, really important that you take this opportunity and not waste it. So don't be lazy. Don't be distracted. Don't be afraid. Right? This is not a dress rehearsal. Right? This is your life. And if you stay true to who you are, you stay focused on finding that opportunity that really resonates with you, you will be, in many respects, defining your leadership potential. What organization, what company, what industry, what team is going to have an enormous impact on your underlying leadership potential. So don't lose sight of that. Take that decision very seriously. Take the time and make sure that you have the courage to get it right. Second important principle beyond authenticity is, in fact, courage. I always find it helpful to go to the Webster's dictionary when using a word like courage. So Webster's defines courage as the quality, state of mind, or spirit to face danger or hardship with confidence and resolution. All right? The quality, state of mind, or spirit to face danger or hardship with confidence and resolution. Now, courage is essential in today's business world. Every effective leader, every great leader has to instill courage in their organization to be able to face adversity, to aspire to great things without the fear of failure, and to be willing to innovate, right? To be willing to take risks and to be willing to trust one another. Courage is an essential ingredient, not just for great leaderships, but for great organizations. So let me give you, again, some personal examples of why I think courage needs to be sort of a central theme when thinking about great leaders. If you use the example of just this last 18 months, which have been a challenging one, this dates back to basically the middle of 2008, July 2008. At that point in time, we were very clear at Bain that we were headed for a severe economic downturn. We actually thought it was going to happen a year earlier, in fact. But by the time we hit the summer of 2008, the signs were very, very ominous. And of course, by the time we hit the fall, we were in the midst of the most severe global financial and economic crisis since the Great Depression. Now, when faced with that kind of danger and potential hardship, that really tests the nerve, the heart, the sinew of an organization. And organizations can't navigate environments like that unless they have courage. So one of the things that we did at Bain is we, first of all, made absolutely certain that we were prepared. We'd been through many downturns before. We had a great playbook, but this one was different, and we knew it. And as a consequence, we spent an enormous amount of time ensuring that we planned for every possible contingency so that we could maintain investments in the key parts of our business that we knew were going to be essential for the long-term health and prosperity of our firm. But that alone isn't enough. You have to have an organization that is aligned, right? Every single partner, every member of the team around the world, knowing that what was critical to not only survive but to thrive through this downturn was to invest, was to ensure that we were doing what was right for the long-term health and prosperity of the business, which meant making some sacrifices in the short run economically, but to further building our team in critical markets and sectors, to growing our talent pool, to continuing to build our brand, to continue our innovation loop. And by doing all of that, being well prepared, and having an organization and an ownership team completely aligned, we can stare into uncertainty. We can stare into the turbulence and be resolute and be confident, and as a consequence can execute. Now, looking back over the course of 2009, we were able to navigate, I think, extremely well. Excellent planning, good preparation, outstanding execution, a little bit of luck. We got through 2009 surprisingly well. More importantly, though, the metric of managing through a downturn like this is the momentum that you carry coming out of it. Right? You should be, if you manage effectively through the downturn, capture a disproportionate amount of growth as the economy stabilizes. And in fact, that's what we've seen. With record revenue levels for the firm, all-time record levels of revenue in Q4, and again in Q1 this year. Now, the second piece of courage comes on the innovation front. In today's environment, it is absolutely essential that your organization has the capacity to continually innovate. There is no choice. The pace of change is accelerating. It is relentless. If you're not figuring out how to obsolete your business model, somebody will do it for you. So innovation takes courage. Right? At Bain Company, innovation is central to the way that we run our business. In fact, innovation is part of our mission. It's very explicitly stated in our mission that we want to redefine the management consulting industry. And I think we have done that. We have a wonderful track record of very visible innovation successes, which include Bain Capital, our private equity practice, Bridgespan, our not-for-profit affiliate that is now the largest and most successful non-profit consulting firm in the world, our contingent pricing model, which we pioneered in the industry. But we also have some visible failures as well. Bain Lab was an internet incubator that we launched back in the dot-com boom. Evolution, which was an internet operating company that we formed with Texas Pacific Group and Kleiner Perkins back in the earlier part of the last decade. But you know what? All of those successes and failures are important parts of our innovation track record. And we treat them like that. Right? We've learned over time that actually some of the greatest lessons come from our failures, not our successes. And in fact, the lessons we learn from Evolution and Bain Lab have fed many of the next generation business model innovations we've spawned since. Not all of which have succeeded, but that's part of the process. So in order to create an organization that has the capacity to constantly innovate, you cannot allow people to be paralyzed by the fear of failure. So it's important that as a leader in the organization, that you set the right example, which is why I make it an explicit objective to champion key innovation efforts inside the firm. Because if I'm not willing to put my commitment and my reputation on the line in order to drive innovation, then how can I expect other people at Bain to have the courage to do it? So, first principle, authenticity. Second principle, courage. The last principle is culture. Now, this is a frequently misunderstood topic, and one that does actually get a reasonable amount of attention. But I think what's most important is to understand what culture means for a leader. Truly great leaders always have their finger on the pulse of their organization's culture. All right? You have to. It is the lifeblood of the organization. And it's interesting, as a leader, the culture is oftentimes defined by the behaviors of the people who are seen as leaders in the organization. And as a consequence, everything that you do as a leader, particularly when you're a CEO or a prominent leader in the organization, at any given point in time, is either enhancing or degrading that culture. You really are under a microscope. And as a consequence, you have to bring your best to every single interaction. You know, as a CEO of even a medium-sized to large organization, and any given day, there are tens, if not hundreds of people who need something from you. Right? It could be a very important issue. It could be a major investment decision. It could be a big problem with an important customer. It could be that they just have an issue with something in their day-to-day work. It could be they just want career advice. Whatever it is, and whatever importance you place on it doesn't matter. Because if they are going out of their way to bring an issue to you as the CEO, it's important to them. And so if you don't bring your best to every one of those interactions, regardless of what kind of day you're having, you are going to be sending signals to the organization that have broad and deep ripple effects throughout the company. I can't tell you the number of times that I have unintentionally signaled something to a member of our team by an inflection in my voice, by a change in my body language, right, by a facial expression. And I don't learn of the impact that that signal has had on that person and the ripple effects it has within the organization for days, for weeks, or maybe even months, or maybe never. The power of being able to live consistently the tenets of the culture, to always be consistent with the values of the organization, to ensure that your behaviors are constantly reinforcing what the organization holds itself to in terms of its operating principles, its beliefs, its value systems. You have to be consistent. You have to be present at all times. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that great leaders seem to have an absolutely bottomless capacity to be present. Right? I mean, how do you do it? I mean, the organization is grabbing at you all the time, everywhere you go, and that's just internally, let alone all the demands externally. Right? You've got your personal life. You've got lots of other issues that are demanding your time, your emotional energy. So how do you stay present all the time? Great leaders have this extraordinary capacity to stay present and to be aligned at all times. Now, how do they do that? Well, what I've learned over time is that those great leaders are completely aligned with the organization's culture. Right? It's not a hardship to act consistently with a culture and to reinforce it. In fact, just the opposite. The way that they persevere through all of the demanding elements of the role is that every time they have the opportunity to really reinforce the culture, it creates energy for them. It doesn't drain it. It reinforces their passion for the organization. It doesn't degrade it. And this, as I've observed over time, is really the power of authenticity. It's what gives you the energy and the fuel to be a great leader and to affect a culture in the way that only a handful of great leaders have been able to do over long periods of time. So let me wrap up my formal remarks with a little story. And it's a bit of an embarrassing one, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it because I've embarrassed myself many times before. I'm going to take you back to March 1st of 2005. Okay. I was actually, my election as Worldwide Managing Director was sort of official was confirmed in January at the beginning of the year 2005, but my first official day on the job was March 1st of 2005. And I was in Tokyo, I was in Japan, at a meeting of our entire Asia-Pacific leadership team. And that evening, the office set up a big reception. So we had the entire Tokyo office and our entire Asia-Pacific leadership team all in a room about this size. And unbeknownst to me, they had scheduled a very formal and elaborate tea ceremony, which was fine. I had studied very diligently on all of the cultural issues that I needed to be mindful of, including how to kneel, right? How to hold the teacup, and how to be deferential to the people running the ceremony. And that was great, so it was fine. It was a little bit of a surprise to me, but I managed to maintain my composure. I was ready. And so they start with the ceremony, and as they begin the formal part of the process, I begin to take off my loafers, brand new ones, by the way. And they all of a sudden held me back, and they said, no, wait. We have to go through several steps before we're going to kneel on the mat. And I said, oh, okay, no problem. So the tea ceremony progresses, and at the point where we're about to kneel down, they signaled to me to kneel down. And I had been so sort of overtaken by this melodic ceremony that I just immediately responded instinctually and stepped onto the mat to kneel down. And as I heard the very, very delicate rice paper crumble under the weight of my brand new Allen Edmonds loafers, I looked up, and the entire audience had gone completely silent. And you could literally feel from everybody gasping all the oxygen going out of the room. Okay? So here I am. All right. I have not been in this job officially for 24 hours yet. Okay. I have managed to desecrate a very, very important cultural symbol in front of the entire Asia-Pacific leadership team and the entire Tokyo office. Okay? So as I pulled back, trying to minimize the damage to the mat, I looked up, and all I could do, the only thing I can think of saying was, well, boy, talk about getting off on the wrong foot. Fast forward 2 months later, I'm in Shanghai at our worldwide partner meeting, global partner meeting, all the partners from around the world. And I'm in the process of introducing the state of the firm. This is the first opportunity for the new worldwide managing director to get up, and demonstrate my command of the issues, my confidence, competence and passion about where we were taking the firm. And we were actually launching our strategy for the next 5 years. Very, very high stakes situation, particularly for a new leader. So how do you think I started that presentation? I told the tea story, just as I described it to you. And why did I do that? Right? That took some courage. But I knew that the organization would value, by virtue of my knowledge of the culture, the humility, the willingness to sort of laugh at yourself, and the power of actually letting people there know a little bit more about the person delivering the message before we got to the message. And to this day, most partners remember very vividly the tea story. For the next 55 minutes, I went through, by my own estimation, a phenomenal presentation. I mean, I nailed it. It was, every important point. It was, I was really at my best. Nobody remembers anything about that 55 minutes, but they remember that tea story. They remember the tea story. So, to me, that is an indelible lesson in the power of authenticity, the importance of courage, and the value of culture. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We do have until 1:30, so questions. I'm going to ask you to use the microphone, though, because we're getting this on video. We want to make sure we have the audio. So please, questions. Courage.
Courage. Who has some courage today? Anything's fair game.
Yeah, please, you can just come right up to the microphone. And if you've got one, you can stand in front of the microphone.
Good afternoon. Well, when you were talking about innovation in the management consulting industry and so on, have you seen any shift in the last 18 months? Meaning, I was working in consulting also, and I know that some companies were thinking about moving from the pure recommendation into maybe implementation and commit the fees and so on. Have you seen something similar?
Yeah, so good question. Just that the issue is, have we seen a change in the industries? The last 18 months created sort of a significant shift in the way that management consulting firms are thinking about their role in the world, how deep they get into implementation, comment about sort of putting fees at risk. The short answer to your question is yes, we have seen some changes. As is often the case in a turbulent economic environment, what happens is structural trends tend to get amplified and accelerated by virtue of the cycle. And obviously, given the cycle that we're in the middle of now, there have been sort of a significant amplification of some structural trends. We are definitely seeing an increase in our field, in our industry, an increased focus on ensuring that people actually deliver results with the work they do. Obviously, the economic conditions, but more importantly, the speed with which decisions need to be made and the importance of executing effectively are increasingly prominent in the eyes of our clients, whether they be corporations or big investors. So the standards are constantly going up. And we've been a big innovator in our industry as it relates to aligning incentives. So we were a real pioneer putting fees at risk. I mean, we believe fundamentally that if you think that you're good at delivering results, at helping improve the value of companies, why wouldn't you be willing to put your money where your mouth is? That's why we started Bain Capital. All right, we said if we're really the best in the world at improving the value of companies, we should be willing to put our money behind that. We actually today offer to put our fees at risk in every single client situation we're involved in. And not every client wants to do that, but about 45% of our revenue last year came from clients where we had some significant portion of our fees at risk, contingent upon actually delivering the results that we had jointly defined as the purpose of our work together. That trend, that method, which creates fabulous alignment with clients, holds us accountable as well as it does to the client to actually delivering, is beginning to change the competitive dynamics in the industry. And we've seen many of our primary competitors who've traditionally sort of avoided this particular approach. They're now having to compete on our terms. So we've definitely seen an acceleration of that trend.
The Haas School is not putting any fees at risk. I just want to... Other questions, please.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. We got one in the back.
Yeah, back, and then number 2 here.
So I actually used to work for you, and I never would ask this when I did. But in the past 5 years, what would you say was your biggest mistake as the global head of Bain, and you're also the best decision you ever made?
I guess you're not coming back? Let me see. The biggest mistake. I think probably the biggest, I don't know if it's not a discrete mistake, probably the biggest error in judgment I've had in this role is probably underestimating what it takes to change an organization of our scale and complexity. At Bain, we're a very, very entrepreneurial organization. As you know, we are lean, we're flexible, we don't have any politics or bureaucracy in our organization. And as the company has grown dramatically over the last 5 years, I think we've retained a lot of the elements of that entrepreneurial spirit and that flexibility. But as we've grown, and 42 offices and 5,000 people around the world, industry practice areas, individual offices, capabilities that run across new products, innovation, business model experiments. Getting an organization of that scale and complexity to change and to move as quickly as we want it to continue that innovation track record, is I probably underestimated that, sort of consistently underestimated that over time. And so one of the things that we're doing now is focusing heavily on how we really ensure that we're a model of change management, a model of good leadership and effective execution. So that'd probably be the biggest sort of continual error in judgment I've made in guiding the firm. I think the best decision I've made in the last 5 years was taking this job. I've really enjoyed it, and I continue to enjoy it, and I feel very lucky. That sense of alignment that I talked about in my first day at Bain, I feel more so today than I have at any point in my Bain career, and so I feel very fortunate that I corrected my mistake earlier in my career and found this organization, and it found me.
There was another question here. I think, please.
Yeah.
First off, do you think that aligning fees with results keeps an independent perspective, or does it put it at stake?
Yeah, I absolutely think it maintains independence. One of the things that is difficult to do, it's very easy to say we're going to align our incentives. In fact, this is one of the things that our competitors continually stumble over, is how you do it there is a real art and science to it. And we have more accumulated experience by a factor of 10 than anybody else in our industry in actually structuring these relationships in a way that doesn't create conflict and doesn't create issues when things go really, really well, because when we put fees at risk, we expect upside. over and above our fees. And on average, we end up earning a premium on our fees when we put our fees at risk. And that's a great metric to say, hey, do we consistently deliver results? We do. But you don't want to create a situation where the client feels like in order for you to succeed, they fail. So how you structure the alignment, we oftentimes ensure that that our incentives are aligned with how management's being incentivized. So rather than taking a discrete project and saying, okay, I'm going to increase cycle time in this factory. But if the organization is having quality problems, right, and therefore loses sales, and the organization doesn't do well, then us getting paid for improving cycle time doesn't make any sense. So what we do is we always have that sense of alignment established at the senior executive level, at the general manager level, so that we're dealing with integrated outcomes. And as long as you're dealing with integrated and holistic outcomes for the business, you can't run into conflict issues, right? Because everybody's working in the same direction. Oftentimes what we find, this dialogue with clients about results, is it helps, even when we're going into sales situations, we say, look, we want to very clearly define what the outcomes are. What it is that you want to achieve. And you'd be amazed at how often there's a lack of agreement or clarity among management as they're beginning to embark on a multi-million-dollar consulting project, what result they're actually after. And so even the process of going through that dialogue early on ensures that we're aligned and avoid some of these issues as it relates to conflict. Yeah, in the back room.
One of the benefits of a consulting model is the flexibility to enter new markets and create new products pretty rapidly, but that also gives you a huge amount of choices. You mentioned managing the innovation process beforehand. What sort of process do you put in place to ensure that you're not doing too much or changing strategies too quickly? Yeah,
that's a really, really, really good question. This is hard. This is really, really hard to do. You correctly point out that in a consulting business, particularly one like ours that is filled with a bunch of entrepreneurs, controlling the innovation process but not controlling it too much is a very, very, very delicate balance. So one of the things that we try to do is be clear about where the domains are for purposes of innovation. In other words, creating some boundary conditions, some playpens, so to speak, for areas where we know we need to innovate. And that way we understand where the investments are taking place. And we'll typically pick a few areas where it's necessary for us to drive the innovation process top down or from the center as we describe it. If it's a major, something like Bain Capital, if we're going to go out and invest other people's money, that's something that we have to manage from the center. There's legal, regulatory issues associated with that. We have to make sure we get it right. There's conflict issues and so on. But there's a lot of innovation that takes place that is just organic, purely organic, where people understand that it's a domain that the firm's interested in, and you just allow people's creativity to flourish. And then there has to be an established process for monitoring those and for people to have the ability to bring those ideas up through the organization to get sort of funding or resourcing as necessary as they gain confidence in the ability for those innovations to have real impact. So it's an interesting combination of good control, boundary setting, and yet unleashing the creativity of the organization. And I never feel like we have that balance right. I think we're being too organic or we're being too top down at any given point in time. But making sure that you're working to strike that balance is essential. The other thing I'd say, there are two lessons we've learned from managing innovation over time that are really critical. One is you have to put a realistic timeline on how long it takes to bring a truly innovative idea or concept to market. One of the things that we see in our clients, and we've certainly been guilty of this in the past, is that the most important innovations, right, the things that really matter, the things that are potentially truly transformational for your business, the things that generate the biggest paybacks oftentimes for investments in innovation, take years to mature and years to refine to the point that they can really be meaningful to the business. And so you have to put the right time frame on it. You have to be willing to invest for years at a time in order to bring those to bear. Because at any given point in time, the organization can come up in a difficult quarter and kill it on the basis that it's not generating ROI now or next quarter. And so you have to be really, really committed to the long term. And we see organizations make that mistake all the time. The second thing is that you have to make sure that people understand that failure is okay. Right? And if you don't learn from failure in the innovation process, it's like trying to run a race with your legs tied together. Right? Most of the learning comes from the failures. Most organizations tend to bury the failures. Right? They ostracize the people leading the failed experiments. What you have to do is make the people who lead the failed experiments heroes. Right? Elevate the lessons learned. And not only does that accelerate the learning, but it makes it possible for other people to have the courage to innovate themselves, because they're not paralyzed by the fear of failing. Very easy thing to say, but boy, if there aren't role models for that around the organization, no matter what you say to somebody, they're not going to put their career in their hands. They're not going to put their own, deficiencies, on display. It's a very unnatural act, and so the organization has to support that process.
We have time for just one more. Who would like it, please?
It's got to be a really good question.
Please.
I'll just shout out loud. How do you manage time between managing your partners internally and managing your clients, and which one of these takes precedence?
So the question was, how do I manage my time between the partners and clients, and which ones takes precedent? Clients always take precedent, right after my family. So, and I think that's a tenet of one of the sort of cultural elements of our partnership, and an important one. Partners come. Are critical part of our business. I work for them, and so they need to have my time and attention. But everybody understands that clients come first, right after family.
Steve, thank you for coming back to your alma mater.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Great job.